The message came at exactly 4:17 p.m. I remember the time because I stared at my phone longer than I should have, rereading the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. Family dinner tonight, 8 p.m. Be there, it's important. No please, no warmth, just a command. That was my dad now. Brief, distant, and strangely formal. Not the man who used to leave sticky notes in my lunchbox, or call me just to ask how my day was going. That version of him had faded slowly over the past 2 years, ever since he married Layla, and with her came her daughter, Sana. I placed my phone face down on the table, but the words lingered in my mind. It's important. That phrase pressed against something uneasy in my chest, like a warning I couldn't quite hear yet. We hadn't had a family dinner in months, not since the last one ended with me sitting silently at the edge of the table, while Layla laughed too loudly, and my dad smiled like he didn't notice I was barely speaking. Not since Sana had rolled her eyes at me when my dad complimented her grades, and completely ignored mine. Still, I went, because no matter how distant he had become, he was still my father, and some part of me, may be the most foolish part, still hoped he would look at me the way he used to. The house looked different when I arrived that evening, not physically. The same cream-colored walls, the same wooden door with the faint scratch near the handle from when I dropped my keys years ago. But it felt staged, like a place pretending to be a home. The lights inside were brighter than usual. Too bright. I could hear laughter echoing faintly from the dining room before I even stepped inside. Layla's laughter. I paused at the door for just a second longer than necessary, steadying myself before pushing it open. "Ah, you're here," Layla said almost immediately, appearing in the hallway as if she had been waiting. Her smile was wide, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're just in time." Just in time for what? I nodded politely, slipping off my shoes. "Hi." My dad stepped into view behind her, adjusting his sleeves. For a moment our eyes met, and something flickered there. Guilt, hesitation, but it vanished just as quickly. "Hey," he said, "glad you came. Glad you came. Not I missed you, not you look nice, just that." I swallowed the small sting rising in my throat, of course. The dining table was already set when I walked in. Perfectly arranged plates, polished cutlery, candles flickering softly in the center like this was some kind of celebration. Sana was sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up when I entered. "Hi, Sana," I said. She hummed in response. Not even a glance that used to hurt more than it did now. Now, it just confirmed what I already knew. I didn't belong here anymore. I took my seat, noticing immediately that the seating arrangement had changed. My usual place next to my dad was taken. By Sana, of course. Instead, my plate had been set at the far end of the table, a small detail, easy to overlook. But not to me, because it wasn't just about where I sat, it was about where I stood. Dinner began with forced normalcy. Layla talked endlessly about something trivial, her friend's vacation, I think. Sana chimed in occasionally, her voice bright and eager in a way I had never heard directed toward me. And my dad listened. He laughed at their jokes. He asked follow-up questions. He leaned in like their words mattered. I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate, wondering when exactly I had become invisible. At one point I spoke. Just a small comment, something about work. No one responded, not even a nod. It was as if my voice had dissolved into the air before it could reach them. I pressed my lips together, my fingers tightening slightly around my fork. This wasn't new, but tonight it felt intentional. Then I noticed it, a folder, thin cream-colored, sitting near my dad's place at the table, half hidden beneath a folded napkin. My eyes lingered on it longer than they should have. There was something about it. Something too deliberate, too carefully placed. Important, just like the message, a quiet tension curled in my stomach. I didn't ask about it, I didn't need to. Because I already had a feeling I knew. Not exactly what, but enough. Enough to understand that this dinner wasn't just a dinner. It was an announcement, a decision already made, a moment where something would be taken or given. And somehow, I already knew which side I would be on. As the plates were cleared and the room grew quieter, my dad finally straightened in his seat. The subtle shift in his posture didn't go unnoticed. Layla placed her hand gently over his, her smile returning. This time sharper, more certain. Sana sat up a little straighter, her phone now forgotten. And me. I leaned back slightly in my chair, my expression calm. Because while they thought this was the moment that would change everything, they didn't realize something crucial. I wasn't surprised, not anymore. Not after what I had already seen. Not after what I already knew. And as my dad cleared his throat, preparing to speak, a quiet thought settled firmly in my mind. Go ahead. Make your announcement. I'm ready. The moment my dad cleared his throat, the room seemed to shrink. Even the faint clinking of dishes from the kitchen stopped, as if the house itself was holding its breath. This isn't just a regular dinner, he began. Of course it wasn't. I folded my hands neatly in my lap, my face calm, unreadable. Across the table, Layla gave him an encouraging squeeze, her fingers curling around his like she was guiding him through something rehearsed. Sana sat beside him, her posture suddenly perfect, back straight, chin lifted slightly, like she already knew she was the center of this moment. I watched all of them carefully, every glance, every tiny movement, because once, not long ago, I would have been caught off guard. I would have felt that familiar rush of confusion, followed by the slow, aching realization that I was being left out again. But not tonight. Tonight, I was ready. I've been thinking about this for a long time. My dad continued, his voice steadier now. And I believe it's the right step for our family. Our family. The words landed heavier than he probably intended. Layla smiled proudly, her eyes shining like this was a victory she had already claimed. Sana glanced at him, then at her mother, and then, finally, at me. For a split second, our eyes met. There was something there, not guilt, not kindness, something closer to anticipation. Like she was waiting to see how I would react. I didn't give her the satisfaction. My dad reached for the folder, the same one I had noticed earlier. He pulled it out slowly, placing it in front of him with a kind of quiet ceremony. The soft sound it made against the table echoed louder than it should have. I want to make things official, he said. There it was, the confirmation, not that I needed it. I've decided to adopt Sana. Silence followed. A thick, suffocating silence, and then, oh my God, Layla gasped, her hand flying to her chest like she was hearing this for the first time. Are you serious? Her performance would have been impressive if I hadn't already known. My dad nodded, his eyes soft as he turned to Sana. You've been like a daughter to me for a long time. This just makes it real. Sana's expression shifted instantly. Her eyes filled with tears, perfectly timed, perfectly placed. Really? She whispered. He smiled. Really? She stood up, throwing her arms around him in a dramatic embrace. Layla joined them seconds later, wrapping them both in what looked like a picture. Perfect family moment. And just like that, they completed the image without me. Clapping broke the silence. Layla pulled back just enough to start it, her smile wide and triumphant. This is beautiful, she said, her voice thick with emotion. My dad looked around the table then, as if expecting something. Expecting me. I could feel his gaze settle on me, waiting for tears, for shock, for some kind of reaction. But I gave him none of it. Instead, I picked up my glass of water and took a slow, measured sip. Calm, composed, prepared. Aren't you going to say anything? Layla asked, her tone light but edged with something sharper underneath. All eyes turned to me. Finally, I set my glass down gently, meeting my dad's gaze first, then Sana's. Then Layla's, I think. I began softly, my voice steady. It's a big decision. It wasn't approval. But it wasn't opposition either. Just enough to keep them guessing. My dad frowned slightly, clearly unsure how to read me. It is, but it's the right one. For you, I said quietly. The words hung in the air, subtle but unmistakable. Layla's smile tightened. Sana shifted slightly, her grip on my dad loosening just a bit. But he didn't respond. Maybe he didn't know how. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms loosely as I looked at the folder again. I assume everything's already arranged, I added. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Yes, he said slowly. The paperwork is ready. We just need to finalize it. Of course, already decided, already done. This dinner wasn't about discussion. It was about announcement, about control, about making something official without asking the one person it might affect the most. You've really thought this through, I said. I have, he replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. I nodded once, I can tell, because I had seen it, every document, every signature, every quiet conversation behind closed doors that they thought I didn't hear. They thought I was distant, unaware, out of the loop, but the truth was I had been watching, listening. Preparing well, Layla said, clapping her hands together lightly, breaking the tension. This is a happy moment. Let's not make it awkward. Awkward? The word almost made me smile, if only she knew. My dad looked at me again, softer this time. I hope you understand. Understand? I did. More than he realized. I understood exactly where I stood in this new version of his life. Exactly how easily I had been replaced. Exactly how little my presence or absence seemed to matter in his decisions. And that understanding, it didn't break me, it strengthened me. I gave him a small nod. I understand. I said, and I meant it. Just not in the way he thought. Because while they sat there, wrapped up in their perfect little moment, while they believed this was the night everything changed in their favor, they had no idea this wasn't the beginning of their story. It was the beginning of mine, and unlike them, I hadn't walked into this dinner unprepared. As Layla poured more drinks and Sana clung to her new title, my eyes drifted once more to the folder on the table. Then back to my father. A quiet, almost invisible smile touched my lips. Go ahead, I thought. Celebrate. You have no idea what's coming next. They thought the night was theirs. I let them believe it. Layla poured juice into everyone's glasses, like she was hosting a celebration that had already been sealed in her favor. Sana stayed close to my dad, her hand still resting lightly on his arm, as if afraid the moment might disappear if she let go. And my dad, he looked relieved, relieved that I hadn't argued, relieved that I hadn't made a scene, relieved that everything had gone smoothly. That was his first mistake. You should sign it now, Layla said gently, her fingers brushing the edge of the folder. Why wait? Of course she wanted it done immediately. No delays, no interruptions, no chances for anything to go wrong. My dad hesitated for just a second, but then nodded. Yeah, maybe you're right. He reached for a pen. And that's when I spoke. Before you do that, I said calmly, can I ask something? 3 heads turned toward me again. But this time there was a shift, a flicker of unease, because something in my tone had changed. My dad frowned slightly. What is it? I tilted my head just enough to seem thoughtful. When did you decide this? like I said. He replied, a little more guarded now. I've been thinking about it for a long time. A long time? I repeated softly. So before or after you changed your will? The word will hit the table like a dropped glass. Sharp, unexpected, dangerous, Layla froze. Sana's hand slipped from my dad's arm. And my dad, he went completely still. What are you talking about? Layla asked quickly, her voice tight. I didn't look at her. My eyes stayed on him. Dad, I said gently. Before or after? His grip on the pen tightened. That's not something you need to worry about. I almost smiled. There it was, deflection, avoidance, confirmation. I think it is. I said, my voice still calm, too calm. Especially since I've already seen it. That did it. Layla stood up slightly from her chair. Seen what? I finally turned to her, meeting her gaze fully for the first time that night. The updated will, I said. Silence, thick, heavy, unavoidable. You went through his private documents. She snapped, her composure cracking. No, I replied evenly. They were left open on his desk. I didn't have to go looking. That part wasn't entirely true. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the truth inside those pages. My dad exhaled slowly, setting the pen down. It's not what you think. Then explain it. I said, no anger, no raised voice, just a quiet challenge. And somehow that was worse. Layla stepped in before he could answer. This is completely inappropriate. We're celebrating, are we? I cut in softly. Her mouth snapped shut. I leaned forward slightly, my fingers resting lightly against the table, because from where I'm sitting. I continued, this feels less like a celebration and more like a replacement. Sana's eyes widened. My dad flinched, and Layla, she looked furious. That's not true. My dad said quickly, no one is replacing anyone. Really? I asked. I gestured lightly around the table. My seat changed, no response. You stopped calling. Silence. You made a decision this big without even talking to me. His jaw tightened. And then there's the will. I added quietly. That word again. He looked away this time, and that was all the answer I needed. I didn't say anything before. I continued, my voice steady but softer now. Because I wanted to see how far this would go. Layla laughed bitterly. Oh, please, you're being dramatic. Am I? I asked. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded set of papers. The air in the room shifted instantly, because they recognized it. Even before I placed it on the table, you shouldn't have that, my dad said, his voice low. I made a copy. I replied, of course I did. I slid the papers across the table slowly, deliberately, until they stopped in front of him. He didn't touch them, didn't need to. He already knew what they said. Everything goes to you. I said, looking at Sana. Her face paled. House, savings, investments. Then I looked at Layla, and control stays with her until you're ready. Layla's lips parted, but no words came out. And me, I continued, my gaze returning to my dad. Nothing. The word settled like dust after a collapse. Quiet, final, it's not like that. He said again, but this time there was no conviction behind it. Then what is it like? I asked. He didn't answer, because there wasn't a better version of the truth. I didn't stop you tonight. I said, sitting back again. I didn't interrupt your announcement. I didn't embarrass you. I let that sink in. Because I wanted you to have your moment. Layla scoffed softly. How generous. I ignored her, but now, I added, my voice just a fraction firmer, it's my turn. That's when my dad finally looked at me again, really looked at me, and for the first time that night, he didn't look relieved. He looked worried because he was starting to understand something they had all missed. This wasn't a reaction. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even pain. It was control. And as the silence stretched between us, heavy with everything they hadn't expected. I met his gaze steadily, unshaken, uncertain no longer. The silence after my words didn't just linger, it settled, heavy, unavoidable. Permanent. No one reached for their glass, no one moved. Even the soft flicker of the candles seemed too loud for the moment we were sitting in. My dad stared at the papers in front of him like they might disappear if he waited long enough. They didn't. Truth has a way of staying. You went too far, Layla said finally, her voice low, controlled, but trembling underneath. I turned to her slowly. No, I replied. I just stopped staying quiet. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue again. Because for the first time since I had walked into that house, she didn't have control of the narrative anymore. My dad ran a hand over his face, exhaling deeply. I was going to talk to you about it. When? I asked. He didn't answer. Because there was no good time to tell your daughter. She no longer mattered in your future. It wasn't meant to hurt you, he said instead. That almost made me laugh. Almost, but it did. I said simply. No accusation, no anger, just truth, and somehow that hit harder than anything else I could have said. Sana shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her earlier confidence gone. She looked between us, uncertain now, like she wasn't sure where she stood in all of this anymore. Good, for once, she understood the feeling. I didn't ask for this. She muttered quietly. I looked at her, really looked this time. Maybe that was true. Maybe she hadn't asked, but she hadn't refused either. And sometimes silence is its own kind of choice. I'm not blaming you, I said. Her eyes flickered with something relief, maybe. But I'm not pretending this didn't happen either. My dad pushed the papers away, finally breaking eye contact with them. I made mistakes, he admitted. It was the closest thing to honesty he had given me all night. But it wasn't enough, not anymore. I didn't come here to fight. I said, standing slowly from my chair. 3 sets of eyes followed me instantly. I came here because you asked me to. I continued, and because I needed to see it for myself. To see what? He asked, his voice quieter now. I met his gaze one last time, where I stand. And now I knew, not as a daughter, not as a priority, not even as an afterthought. Just outside, I spent a long time wondering what I did wrong. I said, my voice soft but steady, why things changed, why you stopped choosing me. His expression broke slightly at that. Good, he needed to hear it. But the truth is, I continued, picking up my bag. I didn't do anything wrong. That wasn't revenge. That was freedom. Layla let out a small, disbelieving scoff. So that's it. You're just going to walk away. I paused near the door, glancing back over my shoulder. Yes, I said, because staying somewhere I'm not valued. I added, isn't loyalty. It's self-abandonment. My dad stood up quickly. Wait, for a second. Just a second. I hesitated, not because I didn't know what to do, but because a part of me still remembered who he used to be. I can fix this, he said, stepping closer. We can fix this. The words hung in the air between us. Familiar, desperate, too late, you could have. I replied gently, past tense. That was the part that mattered. I walked to the door, my hand resting on the handle. Behind me, I could feel the weight of everything left unsaid. Regret, shock, consequences, this isn't revenge. I said without turning around. My voice was calm, certain, free, its clarity. And then I opened the door. The night air hit differently, cooler, lighter, like I had stepped out of something I didn't belong in anymore. I didn't cry, not then. Not when the door closed behind me. Not when I walked down the path I had known for years. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel rejected. I felt released. They could keep the house, the documents, the version of family they had built without me. I was taking something better, myself, and as I walked away, One quiet thought settled in my mind, not bitter, not angry, just true. The greatest revenge isn't making them feel your absence. It's finally realizing you were never meant to stay.